Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Healing Conversations. My name is Einav Avni with Untangled Healing, and with us today is Rachel Gotto. Rachel, so lovely to have you here.
Good morning, einav.
So tell us, let's get this conversation started. Tell us a little bit about you.
Well, first of all, I'm in Galway in the west coast of Ireland, and I began life down the south coast of Ireland. But originally, we were English, and we actually travelled to Ireland on a boat. My father sold the house in England and put everything onto the boat, including the sofa and the cat and everything else. And they set sail, and they were going to sail to New Zealand and called into Ireland on the way and dropped anchor in a very beautiful harbour in called West Cork, Glandore in West Cork, and never left. So my whole history was changed entirely by a decision that my parents made, and goodness knows where I'd be now if I'd have lived in New Zealand, but I didn't, and I grew up Irish. So that was an interesting beginning for a start, and a lot happened in that time since we dropped anchor. And I've got to today as 53, as a clinical hypnotherapist, as a coach, as an international best-selling author, and basically as a thriver. And that's what I like to call myself, is a thriver.
I love it. Thriver is a very good way of calling yourself. Definitely agree with that. So tell me a little bit what got you started on that journey of becoming a thriver.
Well, I suppose I always had a little bit of an energy in me which was going to serve me all my life, and I I always put it down to the nature and spirit of being a human. And I have a great belief that we have a huge amount of capacity in us to overcome tragedy, trauma, and survive. And at times, we often feel that we're not surviving and we're not actually doing very well. But I believe that we have this capacity. And I noticed myself, and I'll explain in a minute, that there were so many times in my life when I shouldn't have survived. And there were so many times in my life where I actually felt I was truly broken, that I had nothing else left, that I had nothing else to give. But that wasn't the truth. There is this thing, this seam, this energy, this essence that comes right through us as humans. And I think every single one of us has it within us to survive. So the reason why I'm saying that is my story is difficult and my story is extremely challenging.
Mm.
And yet I find it a very hopeful story when I share it. I find it gives a good positive energy to it, because I have been brought to the depths, and I have been allowed to come out of the depths, and I've been pulled back into the depths time and time and time again. And yet I'm here today in 2023. Happy New Year, incidentally. And I find that I still have a huge amount to give, and the battery is not empty. The tank still has something in it. So why I should begin like that is because I don't look back very often, and I give a lot of interviews. And when I say I don't look back, I don't emotionally look back very often. When we've done the work, I think we kind of move away from it to a certain degree. Of course, it's informing us, and it's part of our wounds and our story and all of that behind us. But I'm finding that now that I've done a lot of the work, that I can look back with a bit of a different view. So, in a nutshell, Einav, my childhood was quite difficult. It was quite troubled. My parents were unhappy, and my father was quite narcissistic. And that really was a very difficult thing to navigate. Plus, we were foreigners in a country. We didn't have the same religion. We didn't have the same beliefs and ways, eating even. We were very different. So that made it quite difficult for me to fit in at school. Not that I was necessarily singled out. It was more I felt different and felt I wasn't good enough. And I had a brother who was closest to me in age, Dominic, and he struggled through his childhood as I did. And we both split when we were 17, actually, and went different ways. But Dominic came home a couple of years later, and sadly, he'd been diagnosed with bowel cancer at a very young age. He was 26, and I was about 24 and a half. And it was almost as if I got cancer as well. We were very symbiotic, probably codependent, because of our shared childhood. And so I was devastated and he was devastated. He did not want to do conventional treatment. And so we actually went to places like Mexico and Germany looking for an alternative cure to his cancer because conventional medicine was not offering very much. Sadly, he died at the age of 28, einav. I nursed him for the 2 years, really. I gave up my job and I was with him every moment of the way. And when he died in my arms, it was as if I died too. A part of me was gone. And I didn't know this had happened. I just didn't understand that the ramifications of grief are so immense and so complex. But also I had a codependent relationship with my brother and he was dead. So the guilt and the shame and the what ifs and this survival syndrome of it should have been me who died, it blighted a lot of my ability to even make sense of my life. But there's always a bit of brightness. And in the period that Dominic was dying, I actually met a beautiful man called Nick, and he was to become my husband, and he was an adventurer, an exciting man. And so we got together, but it was, I had a lot of time with Dominic. But to condense the story, Nick and I stayed together and we got married, and I was pregnant very soon after we got married. And that was a year after Dominic died. 8 months later, Nick had drowned. I was 6 months pregnant with our first child, and I was now a widow at the age of 29. So I think anyone listening, their imagination will tell them through their own experiences, somehow the devastation, the loss, the 2 deaths, and then this whole learning to be in life, having been codependent and so on. There was no Rachel. There was no form of myself that I could recognize. I didn't even know who I was. And I had to become a mum very quickly. It was very traumatic birth. Nicola was sick. I was sick. So it was a perfect mess. I wouldn't even say perfect storm. It was a perfect mess. And we bumbled our way along, and I found it very difficult to emotionally connect with Nicola. I was very, very disassociated from myself and my life, and I made very poor choices. I drank, I smoked, and it hurts me to say that, but I'm saying it because some people may be, giving out to themselves and punishing themselves for choices that they make in trauma. And I'm saying that, yes, we do, but that's not the end of the world. We can come back from that. So life went on, and life did not improve for many years. And I suppose I was just about getting my head above water, and I started to behave very strangely, and I didn't notice that there was anything wrong with me because I was so used to feeling so damn miserable, and I was so used to not sleeping because Nicola was a fractious child. I didn't know, but we know now that I would have been diagnosed with complex PTSD and complex grief. So untreated, trying to find my way through motherhood alone. I lived on a house in the middle of nowhere on the top of a hill. I had family support, but I was essentially alone. So when I started to drive on the wrong side of the road or not know how to use the gear stick in the car, I took no notice. And it was really only when I was found unconscious by Nicola on the floor that I actually had to take stock. And I'd started to lose the use of my left leg at night and ignored it. And I illustrate this because we as humans can do some amazingly crazy things when we're traumatized. And I wanted to highlight that to people, that trauma can make us do things and totally ignore our own needs at the deepest sense. And if we haven't even been taught to look after our own needs before that, of course, we're going to be in an extreme deficit of self-compassion, self-care, and possibly the need or the understanding to reach out. I didn't know that I could reach out and get help. It just wasn't part of my dialogue. So I was diagnosed with a benign inoperable brain tumor called an AVM. And I was told that I really should go home and write my will and put my affairs in order, because it was likely that I wouldn't survive more than a couple of years, that I would have an aneurysm and essentially die. Um, I was shocked, but I think I was so shocked from the rest that actually it almost was a bit of a, oh, what next almost. You know, I really didn't take it on board. It was a while before I really fully took on board that I was seriously ill and I had a terminal condition, so to speak. So anyway, between the jigs and the reels, I hunted. I never gave up. And this is a message I love people to hear, because we can often accept what we're told as the truth and the fact. I just didn't do that. I just kept hunting and looking and searching. And I even went from Ireland to England and went around a lot of hospitals in London asking for them to see me and bringing my scans and saying, is there anything you could do? I wanted to be alive. I was a woman, but also a daughter that I could not leave behind. And it took a long time, but finally I found a surgeon who said, right, I think I can give it a go. If I do operate, and if we do manage it, you will need preparatory surgery. And if you do survive the big operation, you'll likely be paralyzed down the left-hand side of your body for the rest of your life. So I hope I'm not just going on, Einav, because it's such a long story. Do you want to interrupt me here?
No, well, I'm honored that you're sharing the story with us. I'm looking forward to hearing more, and also, of course, understanding your wisdom through it, because it is fascinating. And of course, as a side note, I am really sorry to hear of everything that you're describing. I know it wasn't easy.
No, it wasn't, and thank you. I tend to blabber on, so I always worry, you know, because sometimes it's such a big story, but I do like people to hear the full import of it, because I think the outside of it is very, very uplifting. We have to go through the darkness to come through to come out at the end of the tunnel, so to speak. So can you bear with the darkness for another few minutes, and then
Yes,
I will bring us back out into the light. So on the 6th of January 2006, I flew to a place called Bristol in England, and I was to have neurosurgery. And it was kind of the most remarkable time, because they wanted to put me in a wheelchair to bring me to theatre, and I was acutely aware it might be the last time I walk. And so I insisted that I walk down that ward. And I remember walking down that ward, and there were people who were so ill around on either side of me. There's, you know, people with backs which were broken and serious neurological issues. And I was the one who was well, to all intents and purposes. I was walking, and I felt almost like a fraud because I was well. I felt well. And of course I wasn't. And I walked into the theatre, and I didn't remember anything else for a very long time after that. And there are other stories within it, but we don't have the time today for them. So I'm going to skip forward a couple of days, and to really coming round and finding, when I tried to turn over in the bed, I couldn't. And I didn't know what was wrong with me. I'd completely forgotten. I had drains, and, you know, I was very ill, and I had no understanding of what this, and I remember saying, it's a sack of potatoes. I've got a sack of potatoes on my body. And of course it transpired later, they explained to me that actually, yes, I'd survived, obviously, but I had become paralyzed down the left-hand side of my body. And they didn't know if I would ever move again. And they didn't know how much damage they'd had to create in my brain to excise this tumor. And the devastation from that was probably greater to me in terms of the full import than anything else. My freedom, all my other traumas, I'd managed to move and escape myself, and I could distract, and I could make poor choices. I could go somewhere. I could be away from myself. I could run. Now I was really stuck. Now I was caught in my body with my traumas, with everything else, and this trail of destruction behind me. And it was the most devastating feeling. And I think the first thing I said was, will I ever be able to go on the sea again? Because that had been my life. I grew up by the sea. I lived on the sea. I earned a living from the sea at times. And so you can imagine that sense of doom that now I'm trapped, I've nowhere to go. So not being the type of person to take a diagnosis or a prognosis, I have to tell you, it took me a long time to bounce back. I was moved to a brain injury unit to learn to live with the disability that I now had. I had incidentally been left-handed, so I had to learn to brush my teeth, and I couldn't even brush my teeth because I was just so fragile and frail. So I was quite dependent for a while. Slowly over time, though, and this is another thing that I like to share with people, is sometimes when we're in the depths of something, we don't imagine there's anything else. And I didn't imagine there was anything else because I'd no energy. I was traumatized in this. But just slowly over time, something in me changed. And there was just this small, tiny bit of Rachel emerged, just this tiniest bit. And that was where I started to imagine there could be another possibility, that there could be another way of doing this. There could be another way of living. And that ignited that thing I was speaking about earlier, about this energy, this part of ourselves that doesn't die, no matter how traumatized or how grieving we are, how broken we appear. There is still something there. And that something, whatever we like to call it, I mean, some people might call it spirit, some people might call it God, some people might call it nature, life force, but that life force energy emerged again. And that allowed me to slowly find a new way of being in the world. And I did start to heal, and I did start to work very hard with the physios and the OTs and the neurological team. And eventually I started to get a bit of movement, and eventually my leg did start to work. My left arm and shoulder and all this side of upper body it was years really before it moved. But I worked and worked and worked. And this is the thing is that we, I believe, need to be our own advocates. We, I believe, need to be, we need to take charge of some portions of our own healthcare and some portion of the decisions and some portion of the choices we do. And that might be through visualizations, meditations, the food we choose to eat. Look for all avenues is what I say. Because that was the beginning of me coming through some of this stuff. That was the beginning of me coming on that again out of the tunnel and finding new ways of being. And it was a long journey. Yeah. But that journey was like, it was a couple of steps forward, it was a couple back, it was a couple of steps forward. But nevertheless, I felt I had some power because I was working at it. And I think that the most important thing, if you're suffering from depression, anxiety, trauma, whatever small little piece that you can take and make your own and work at it, that is making progress, and that is how we heal. That is it. So the years it took for me to heal were long and arduous. There were parts I was living within the arduous parts of it. I inadvertently became a prescription drug addict because I had to take masses of medications prescribed by doctors to keep the epilepsy I'd been left with at bay. Over the years, that took an enormous toll on me. I became emotionally blunted, disassociated. I didn't process any of my trauma. And I became dependent on these drugs. And it was 7 years later, when I couldn't remember the name of my daughter, her birth date, and having watched a movie the day before with her, that I realized that I had to ask some more questions. And so we started that story again of, could this be different? Is there anything else I could do? The messages I got back was, there's nothing you can do. You're so brain damaged that this is your life now. And yet that essence, that seed in me that said, just see, is there another answer? Just see if there's something else. I did some research and I found I was a prescription drug addict, and that was something I could do, that it was a complex journey. But I took my time and I armed myself with the information, and slowly over 2.5 years, safely, with advice and with support, I withdrew from the one drug, a benzodiazepine, which is like Valium or clonazepam or Xanax, one of those. It took me 2.5 years. But eventually I got to 0. And that was the 27th of May, 2013. That was the beginning of me truly walking out of a tunnel and standing in the bright sunlight, very raw from life indeed, because I had no skin on me. I'd been through so much. I was like somebody who'd come from another time zone or another planet, and I had to learn again how to be in life. I hadn't left my house in 2.5 years. And so this was the beginning of the formation of the new me. And since 2013 to 2023, which is, hey, it's nearly 10 years, life has grown exponentially. I have grown exponentially. I have grown to like myself. I've grown to respect and honor myself. And I've grown to love life more than I ever did. And I work now, as you know, giving back and helping other people. And it's a great joy, and it gets me out of bed, even on the bad days. Serving and helping other people, it's just such a marvelous thing. So there you have it.
And what an incredible story this is. And you know, this thing that you're describing, this force that is pulling you through all of these hardships and challenges, to me it really goes you know, a tiny step before that, and it's that refusal to believe that, you know, that you have to believe this diagnosis or prognosis of, and you know, other people's opinion, and it's actually saying, nah, that's not good enough. I've, you know, I've got to do better, or I have to believe that there is better. And having this drive, you know, driver really is then bring really that you can see, yes, there is something that I can do about it, some other options, some other truth. And here you are today to tell the tale because of these incredible beliefs and drivers. So
Only because, and the thing is as well, you know, some people do say to me, but that's you, I couldn't possibly do that. And
right,
I do not believe that for 1 minute. I really don't. Now, one has to want this. One
yeah,
has to want to be better. One has to want to heal or to grow or whatever. It's not going to happen for the person who doesn't make 1 foot step in the first place. But what I do know from my repeated experiences of being pulled back down to ground, literally 0,
mm,
is that there is this drive in each of us that will surface when it's needed, because I had to go to the extremes to find that out. But
mm,
I have had enough experience of really coming back to basics to know that there is a seed, there is a seam. So when we couple sort of wanting or wishing, or curiosity is a word that I love to use. If you're one bit curious about other ways of being or possibilities, no matter what circumstances you find yourself in or how low, if you just use curiosity, that can be the seed for change. The thing is that we see so many statistics and we see so many examples of why we shouldn't thrive or how we're not going to thrive. And I was given some ridiculous statistic like a 20% chance of surviving surgery. Now, even in my young age, I turned that around to actually that's 80% the other way. Do you know what I mean? So, you know, you've got to, or is that the right way? You know, anyway, whatever. I mean, I inverted the statistics for me so
yeah,
that I said, well, I can be inside that statistic. Why won't I? Somebody will be. Why won't it be me? You
yeah,
know?
might as well be me. Yeah, that is I love it. I really love it because it really shows us that I always get back to this. You know, we have these conditionings, we have these other people's expectations and other people's opinions and what they deem right or wrong or whatever. And we have a choice. We really have a choice. Do you want to follow that? And also looking at these people, they're not necessarily the happiest or healthiest or the ones that you would necessarily want to take examples from. And yet these are the people that we listen to and allow them to dictate our own lives. And here we have, you know, your example that said actually I'm not doing that. I'm,
Yeah,
you know, subscribing to my own truth, not theirs.
Yes, exactly. And of course, we need expert help. And of course, we must respond to medical advice and everything. So, I'm not suggesting that we don't. But what I'm saying is that
Yeah.
this personal journey that we go on, that we take some responsibility for that. And even if, and I've had to face this myself, even if we don't survive, as in what we call actually stay living, if we've done it on our own terms, if we've lived our own truth and lived our own journey, we haven't failed. We have done anything but fail. And I had to deal with my own journey through failure through this, because my programming, my sort of inherited beliefs were, if you weren't physically healthy, you were a failure. And by goodness, was I physically unhealthy for so long.
Yeah.
And so it is also about, understanding where do I acquire this from? Is this the truth about me? Is this something that I picked up from the people who raised me or the environment I was in? Because that
Yeah.
can be so liberating too, because that's part of curiosity. And I think that if we can hone that word curiosity, I find it difficult to say this morning, curiosity, if we can hone curiosity and use it as a tool, we can inform ourselves in the past, and we can also find a direction, going forwards.
Yeah, absolutely. And curiosity is definitely one of my favorite words too. But tell me, before we have to finish very soon, but is that really what you help people do now, to help them see that there's always a choice and that there's always a possibility, or how are you working with people at the moment?
um, I work eclectically, really. I'm very person centered and humanistic in my approach. It depends on what people come to me with, because I'm a clinical hypnotherapist and a coach. So that's, and at times mentoring, it depends. It took a toolbox of stuff, support, techniques, tools for me to heal.
Hmm.
And some of it was to do with healing acquired beliefs from the past and expectations and conditionings from the past. And some of it was to help me find new ways of being in the world. So the way I work with my clients is very organic and eclectic. I use hypnotherapy for the parts of the past, the belief systems, the expectations that are internalized, that are holding a person back where they are. For instance, if they're depressed, if they've got anxiety, or if they have unresolved trauma issues, or even unresolved grief. So
Hmm.
we can reframe the programming in the unconscious mind. I'm fascinated by neuroplasticity and the unconscious mind, because that's hypnotherapy is really neuroplasticity in action, is what I call it. We are changing neural pathways by working with the unconscious mind. It's very, very powerful.
Hmm.
Also, we can expedite the healing process, because we are basically upgrading the hard drive of the brain. The beliefs, we're putting in new beliefs, and they're positive and they're uplifting and they're supportive and they're healing. So we're doing all of that. And then we need the support, the walking on alongside, the coaching, to help us make those changes, to bring us into alignment with what our new beliefs are, and to have new actions, new behaviors, and new curiosities. And all of that comes from how I work. So it predominantly is a mixture of both, and that's how I work, because to me, that's how I healed. I stared at my left arm for months, putting in new wiring, as I call it, to make it move, and it does move now. I may not be able to write with it, but harnessing the power of the brain, to me, is vital in any healing, both physical and emotional. So that's why I
Yeah.
like to work in that area.
Amazing. Amazing. And later on, after the conversation, I will put your social links as well, so that people can find you and have conversations or follow you as
I
they
love
listen.
that. I love that. I love
Yeah,
having new followers, and I love having new people join me.
wonderful. So we will enable that.
Thank you.
And yeah, that brings us to the end of our time together. But that's been such a fascinating conversation, and I thank you so much for bringing us with you to the shadows and also to the light, and showing us that really, as you say, everything is possible, and you can do anything that you put your mind to. Actually, your new mind,
It
your
is.
rewired mind.
Once we harness the mind. And Einav, one last word, if anyone's wondering what happened to my daughter, because I think that's another very positive story. She had her own sets of difficulties and her own traumas to overcome because she was in utero when Nick died and all of that. It took her a long time. She's now 24. She has lived in many countries. She is bilingual. She is emotionally very, very healthy. Now, we were laughing recently because I said to her, there is therapy in the bank. If anything I can do as a parent for you, I have put you through a lot of trauma. And we were only speaking about it last night. And I said, how are you emotionally? And she said, do you know, Mum, I'm not going to therapy anymore. I feel solid. I feel myself. And I love life, and she does love life as much as I do. So both of us together, having come through a long tunnel of darkness, we're both in the light, and that can happen for your children too. Love and presence and hearing and truly listening to really understand, I believe, is what helped us to thrive as a couple, a mother and daughter.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing that as well. And I'm very happy to hear that she's in a good solid place. It's a wonderful thing to know that your kid is in that place.
Yes, it
Yeah,
is.
great. Well, thank you so much, Rachel, for being here, for sharing your wisdom and your story. Like I said, I'll put your links at the bottom of the conversation. But thank you so much for being here with us today.
My pleasure. It's been an absolute joy. Thank you.
Thank you.